I arrived in Ash Grove Hollow on a cold afternoon when the fog clung low enough to drag its belly over the treetops. The road leading into the valley twisted like something afraid of being followed, doubling back on itself more times than the map suggested. My truck sputtered up the last incline before coasting down a gentle slope, the engine wheezing as though relieved to be done with the climb. I felt something similar, a heavy exhale, the kind that accompanies the end of movement and the start of resignation. I had chosen this place because it was quiet, obscure, and because no one here knew the worst thing I had ever done. People in cities have long memories. Out here, the mountains swallowed secrets whole. The valley opened in a slow reveal, the houses appearing between tree trunks like shy animals stepping out of the brush. Ash Grove Hollow wasn't much. 2 crossing roads, a handful of cabins, a boarded-up gas station, and a single store that sold everything from hunting knives to canned soup. I pulled into the dirt lot beside it, half expecting someone to step out and ask what I thought I was doing here. No one did. Inside the store, the air smelled of old timber and something sharp, like cold metal. The woman behind the counter was thin, gray-haired, and watchful. Her eyes reminded me of river stones. Smooth, unremarkable at first glance, but somehow older than the water that shaped them. "You must be Elias," she said. Her voice held no question. "Mara told me you'd be coming." I hesitated with a can of beans in my hand. I didn't know word traveled that fast. "In a small place, it does." She nodded toward the fog outside. "Not much else does." Mara had been the one to arrange the cabin rental after I answered her short, strangely formal listing online. A small furnished cabin, long-term lease preferred. No pets, no visitors after dark. Contact in person only. Most people would have assumed it was some kind of scam. I took it as a sign the place was remote enough to be worth the trouble. "She's at the cabin?" I asked. The woman handed me my change. "Waiting for you." The cabin sat deeper in the valley, where the trees thickened and the sky narrowed into a single strip of dull light. When I parked, Mara was already standing on the porch with a thermos in her hand like she had known the exact moment I would arrive. She wasn't what I expected. Older, yes, mid-60s, maybe, but her posture was strict, almost military. Her eyes were pale and alert, the kind of eyes that looked as though they watched more than they spoke. "You made good time," she said, offering the thermos. "Coffee. It'll taste like dirt, but it's warm." I took it, unsure whether I was supposed to drink it with her or treat it as some symbolic welcome gift. Before I could decide, she gestured me toward the porch steps and said, "Sit. There are things we need to go over before nightfall." Those words tugged at my nerves. "Everything okay?" "Yes," she said, "as long as we respect the rules." She sat beside me with the careful control of someone who had learned over many years not to waste unnecessary movement. The fog shifted through the trees like slow, thoughtful creatures. "What rules?" I asked, though part of me already knew the answer would not be the kind found in rental agreements. Mara folded her hands. "Most of us who live here were taught them as children. Outsiders need to hear them plainly. I'll be direct." She lifted one finger. 1. Do not acknowledge the figure that stands between the trees after sunset. I let out a short, unsteady breath. "A figure? You might see it. You might think you see it. It's not important which. What matters is that you ignore it. You keep walking, or you keep your door shut." Before I could process the absurdity of that, she continued. 2. If you hear your name whispered from the mountains, reply with someone else's name, never your own. A tightness gathered in my chest. "Why would?" Mara shook her head. "Asking why only makes it worse." Her third finger rose. 3. When the ground hums, lie flat and close your eyes until it stops. I stared at her, the words digging into me like hooks. The ground hums? You'll know it if it happens. Her fourth finger. 4. You may dream of a door in the woods. Do not touch its handle, even in your dreams. A chill threaded through me. What happens if someone does? Don't. She said the words so sharply it felt like a slap. Her hand hovered at her side before lifting her fifth finger very slowly. 5. Never speak of the 6th rule. Ask no one about it. I opened my mouth, instinctively ready to form a question I had been explicitly forbidden to ask. The look she gave me stopped the words in my throat. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even fear. It was resignation, the kind worn by people who have lived their entire lives beside an invisible cliff edge. "These rules," she said softly, "will keep you safe so long as you keep them. People do break them sometimes, and when they do..." She sighed. "The Hollow remembers." What does that even mean? But she didn't answer, or maybe she chose not to. Mara stood, brushing off her palms. "You're here because you wanted quiet. You'll find it mostly, but quiet things pay attention when you disturb them, so don't disturb them." Her gaze lingered on me a moment longer than comfort allowed. "You're carrying something heavy," she said. "People always are when they come here, but the mountain doesn't care about our reasons. It only cares about patterns, how we move, what we notice, what we say." The mountain. She spoke the word with a reverence I didn't understand. After she left, I carried my bags inside the cabin and set them down by the bed. The space was simple but welcoming. Warm wood walls, a small kitchen, a single window looking out at an undisturbed stretch of pines. I wanted to believe the rules were nothing more than rural superstition. Every isolated town had its folklore. Every seasoned local had warnings dressed as wisdom. But Mara's voice had held no superstition, only certainty. As dusk approached, the fog thickened and rolled against the cabin like a slow tide. I stepped onto the porch and stared into the tree line. It was quiet in a strange, listening way, as though something in the woods waited for me to speak first. I thought of the life I'd left behind, the shouting, the drunken night, the way my sister's head had hit the corner of the table, my hands on her shoulders, too rough, too angry, too late to undo. The courts called it an accident. My mother called it a tragedy. I called it the only reason I deserved to be alone. Ashgrove Hollow was supposed to offer solitude, not superstition, not rules spoken as if they were survival. As the last light drained from the valley, I felt an instinctive prickle along my spine, an unprovoked certainty that I was being observed. I kept my eyes forward, because somewhere behind the trees where the darkness thickened the fastest, something seemed to shift its weight. My first night in Ashgrove Hollow began the way all uneasy nights begin, with the feeling that something was slightly out of place, though I couldn't have said what. The cabin was warm enough, the fire steady, the lights soft, yet the silence outside pressed against the windows as if it were a physical thing, dense and waiting. Back in the city, noise had been constant. Sirens, cars, neighbors arguing through thin walls. Here, the absence of sound throbbed like a hidden signal. I didn't sleep right away. Part of it was the familiar reluctance to surrender to dreams. My sister had visited them too often, sometimes screaming, sometimes silent, always dying in the same fractured ways. But another part of me hesitated because of what Mara had said about the door in the woods. I told myself it was just superstition. Appalachia had its share of ghost stories, folk tales, backwoods curses. Yet something about the way she spoke, the precision of her warnings, made me wonder what they were really afraid of. Near midnight, the fog thickened to the point where even the porch light couldn't illuminate more than a few feet. The beams dissolved into a pale blur that pulsed faintly whenever the wind stirred. I watched it for several minutes, unable to shake the sense that the world beyond the glass was rearranging itself in ways I wasn't meant to witness. I finally forced myself into bed, telling my body to relax even as my thoughts churned. Sleep came gradually, the way a tide creeps in, soft at first, then swallowing everything. I don't know how long I slept before I woke to the whispering. At first it sounded like leaves rubbing together, a natural enough noise. But then I heard it again, closer, clearer, threading itself through the gaps in the cabin walls. A stretched, breathy shape of sound that leaned into familiarity. Elias. I jolted upright, heart pounding. The room was still dark, though a faint line of moonlight slipped through the curtains. I listened, telling myself it was just my mind replaying Mara's warning, repeating the rules in sleep. But the whisper came again, carrying a cold certainty with it. Elias. It came from outside. from the woods. I sat frozen, the rule hammering itself into my skull. If you hear your name whispered from the mountains, reply with someone else's name, never your own. My throat tightened. I didn't want to speak at all. Something primal in me screamed that any response was a mistake. But the silence stretched, brittle and stretching thin around me. I couldn't risk breaking the rules on my first night. Mara had been so certain, so grave. Aish? Hannah, I whispered, the first name that surfaced. My sister's name. A stupid choice, dangerous, sentimental, born of guilt rather than logic. But it was too late to change it. After I spoke, the woods fell silent, completely. No wind, no insects, no shifting branches, as if the entire valley held its breath. I waited. A minute passed, then another. Nothing. I lay back down, but sleep avoided me. I stared at the ceiling until gray dawn brushed against the edge of the curtains. When the sun finally rose enough to wash the fog thin, I forced myself outside. The world looked normal again. Trees, dew, the faint smell of earth, no signs of anything unnatural. No figure among the trees, no footprints, no broken branches. Still, I found myself standing very close to the cabin, where the ground felt solid beneath my feet and the door remained within arm's reach. Mara arrived just after sunrise, carrying a basket of supplies I hadn't asked for. Bread, dried meat, a jar of something dark I assumed was jam, or maybe some kind of stew. "You heard it, didn't you?" she asked before I even greeted her. I stared at her. "Is it that obvious?" "It is on your face." She tapped the side of her own cheek. "People look different after the first night. The hollow tests newcomers." "Is that what it was?" I asked. "A test?" Mara let out a humorless breath that wasn't quite a laugh. "If it was, it isn't one we designed." We stepped inside so she could set the basket on the table. Her eyes moved slowly over the cabin's interior, as if checking for subtle signs of intrusion. A shifted chair, a misplaced object, a mark on the floor. When she didn't find any, she relaxed slightly. "You answered it, didn't you?" she asked. "Yes." "What name did you give?" I considered lying, but I suspected she'd know. "My sister's." Mara closed her eyes for a moment. "That's a weighty name. Names matter here." It was the first one I thought of. That's how it begins. It uses what you bring with you. A shiver ran through me, so it's real. She looked at me, really looked as if searching for fractures. Real is not the word I'd choose. It's older than real, older than anything we've named. We follow the rules because the rules keep us intact, even if we don't fully understand why. I tried to swallow the tightness in my throat. What happens if someone breaks them? Her gaze drifted to the window. Then the hollow remembers them. And memory is a kind of tether. It pulls. The explanation didn't help. It only raised more questions, but I sensed pushing her would be pointless or dangerous. After she left, I tried to go about my day like normal. I unpacked the rest of my bags, hung a few clothes, set up the small writing desk I'd brought. I made coffee, though it tasted like burnt soil. I stepped outside once or twice, but never far from the porch. Everything looked deceptively calm. Around noon, while clearing brush near the back of the cabin, something caught my attention. A subtle shift of shadow between two slender pines. A shape. Tall. Narrow. Still. My blood went cold. I didn't blink, didn't move. I simply turned my head away slowly, refusing to give it acknowledgement. I could feel it, though, not with my eyes, but with a creeping awareness that soaked into the back of my skull. It stood there for nearly a minute. I knew because I counted, breath shallow, palms sweating. Then the shadow thinned and disappeared. I didn't breathe again until it was gone. The rest of the afternoon passed in a haze. I forced myself to eat. I avoided the windows. I reread the rules 3 times, committing them to memory with the desperation of someone studying a manual for diffusing explosives. Near dusk, the fog began pooling in the valley again. The tree line darkened. I drew the curtains shut. But as night settled, something new happened. Something I wasn't prepared for. The ground trembled, so faintly I almost mistook it for my imagination. A hum, low and steady, spread through the soil like a great exhale from beneath the earth. My breath hitched. Rule 3. When the ground hums, lie flat and close your eyes until it stops. My body hesitated only a moment before I dropped to the floor, pressed my cheek against the wood, and shut my eyes as tightly as I could. The hum deepened. And something beneath the cabin shifted, vast and slow, as though the mountain itself were turning its attention toward me. The floor vibrated under my ribs in a thin, quivering pulse like the heartbeat of something impossibly large. I pressed myself flatter against the boards, eyelids crushed shut, every muscle locked in place. The rule was clear. Close your eyes, lie still, wait. But knowing what to do did nothing to ease the panic swelling inside my chest. The hum deepened, thickened, until it resonated through my teeth. The boards beneath me warmed, then cooled, like breath passing through the earth. I told myself it was some geological anomaly, a distant tremor, a shifting plate, a natural phenomenon with a natural explanation. But deep down, something older than reason whispered the truth. This was not the kind of movement the earth makes. This was a tension. I don't know how long the humming lasted. Time unraveled into a stretched, syrupy blur. Maybe it was a minute, maybe an hour. My heartbeat merged with the vibration until I couldn't tell which belonged to me. Then, all at once, silence. Not the comfortable sort. Not the kind with bird song waiting just beyond earshot. This silence felt like the world inhaling sharply and forgetting how to exhale. I waited. 5 seconds. 10. My pulse hammered. I kept my eyes shut, wanting more than anything to open them, to confirm that the cabin hadn't collapsed, that the world was still intact. But the rule had been specific. Only when the silence grew less rigid did I dare lift my head. The cabin looked the same. The lamp glowed faintly. My coat still hung beside the door. But something in the air felt rearranged, as if all the molecules had shifted half a step to the left, a wrongness so subtle it barely registered, yet burrowed under the skin. I stood slowly, brushing dust from my clothes. My knees wobbled beneath me. The stillness outside pressed against the windows like a thick weight. When I opened the door and stepped onto the porch, the fog had lifted without transition, leaving the sky shockingly clear. Stars littered the darkness in sharp, cold points. I realized, with a jolt of disorientation, that the moon had moved, too far from where it had been earlier, too quickly to be possible. You felt it. The voice came from the path. Mara. She walked toward the cabin with a lantern in one hand, her jaw set, her eyes reflecting specks of the night sky. I exhaled shakily. The ground hummed. It does that sometimes. Her tone attempted calm, but her shoulders were tight, her steps measured. Most newcomers don't experience it so soon. Is that bad? Not necessarily. She stepped onto the porch and looked past me toward the trees. Some people, the hollow notices them faster. People like you. Like me? She didn't answer, and that frightened me more than anything she could have said. Mara set the lantern on the railing, its warm glow cutting a small circle of safety in the dark. Tell me exactly what happened. I recounted the sensation, the changing temperature, the deepening hum, the feeling that the mountain had turned its awareness toward me. When I finished, her expression was unreadable. The rules exist for a reason, she said softly. That was the reason. So what happens now? You keep following them. You don't break them. You don't even brush against them. She paused. And you don't go into the woods tonight. I almost laughed. Trust me, I won't. But she didn't smile. You say that now, but the hollow has a way of calling those who try hardest to ignore it. A gust of cold air moved through the pines, and a faint hiss traveled with it, just enough to raise goosebumps on my arms. I don't want any part of whatever this is, I said. I came here to be alone. You came here to disappear, Mara corrected gently, but nothing disappears in these mountains. Everything is remembered. Her words dug into something sore inside me. I looked away, jaw tight. I didn't kill her on purpose. I didn't say you did. But you know, don't you? The question escaped before I could filter it. Mara watched me with that same Riverstone gaze, slow and discerning. We all come with guilt, Elias. The hollow feels it. It knows how to use it. A cold pit formed in my stomach. Use it for what? That's the problem. Mara lifted the lantern again. It doesn't want anything in the human sense. It doesn't bargain or punish. It observes. That's enough. Why does observing matter? Now she looked tired in a way that came from years of saying the same warning to people who never fully listened. Because attention has weight, she said, and the mountain is too old, too vast, too aware of patterns for us to survive it unprotected. The rules aren't superstition, they're structure, boundaries, and if we don't keep them. She didn't finish. She didn't need to. Instead, she stepped off the porch and walked down the path, lantern bobbing softly. When she reached the bend toward the main road, she paused. Sleep if you can. If you dream of the door tonight, don't touch the handle, no matter what. Then she disappeared behind a screen of pine branches, and I was alone again. The silence settled deeper, thicker. I tried going back inside, but the cabin felt smaller now, suffocating. Something in me insisted I should stay awake. That sleep was a risk. That something waited just behind the threshold of unconsciousness. For hours, I sat at the small table with a notebook open, trying to write down my thoughts. Not for creativity or catharsis, but for anchoring. I feared losing myself to whatever lurked at the edge of this place. So I wrote the rules again and again, each repetition tightening the knot of dread in my chest. Do not acknowledge the figure. Give a different name. Lie flat when the ground hums. Don't touch the dream door. Don't ask about the sixth rule. By the time I crawled into bed, my head throbbed. The night outside was utterly still. No crickets, no owls, just the faint rustle of the wind brushing the cabin walls as if testing their strength. I tried to stay awake. I really did, but exhaustion pulled me under swiftly, like slipping beneath dark water. And I dreamt. Not the nightmares of my sister, not the fractured memories of that night. This dream was too coherent, too steady, structured in a way dreams aren't supposed to be. I stood in the woods behind the cabin, a faint silver light illuminating the bark of the trees. Everything was silent. No wind, no animal sounds. Even my breathing felt muffled. Then I saw it. The door. Not attached to a cabin or wall, just standing freely between two trees, its frame resting on a bed of moss. Wood dark as tar, a handle shaped like a polished stone. My hand rose without my consent. No. I heard my own voice as if from a great distance. No. Don't touch it. But the dream ran on rails I couldn't escape. My fingers hovered inches from the handle. A pulse throbbed from the wood, slow, inviting, patient. Then, from the other side of the door, someone whispered my name. Not my sister. Not any voice I recognized. Something deeper, larger. A voice shaped like a cavern opening beneath the world. Elias. My fingertip brushed the handle, only for a second. But that was enough for something to stir awake. I jerked upright in bed, sweat pouring down my spine, heart hammering against my ribs, and from somewhere deep in the woods, faint but undeniable, the ground gave one low, shuddering hum, as if responding. The hum faded as quickly as it had risen, but the echo of it remained lodged in my bones. I sat rigid in bed, breath caught somewhere between my lungs and throat, listening for any hint that the vibration would return. The cabin felt unbearably small again, the walls too thin, the dark corners too dense. My bare feet touched the cold floorboards, grounding me just enough to move. I didn't turn on the light. Instinct told me illumination might draw attention. Whose, I didn't know, but the thought came with such certainty that I obeyed it without question. Instead, I crossed the room and opened the curtain a sliver. The woods behind the cabin were still, not calm, still in the way of a photograph taken a moment before something terrible happens. A few wisps of fog clung low to the ground, drifting like thin fingers. No wind stirred the branches. The night sky, so full of stars earlier, felt distant now, swallowed by a deep velvet blackness that pressed against the treetops. I strained to see if the door from my dream had manifested in the real world. I told myself I didn't believe it would. Yet a part of me, the part that had heard that whisper through the dream door, feared otherwise. There was nothing, at least nothing I could see. I let the curtain fall back into place. My pulse hadn't slowed. Every instinct shouted at me to leave the cabin, to walk until dawn, to put distance between myself and whatever had stirred the ground awake. But Mara's warning echoed in my skull. You don't go into the woods at night. Not after the humming. Not ever. I wasn't sure if that was an actual rule or one she'd neglected to write down, but at that moment it felt more binding than any of the ones inked on the sheet of paper. I paced the room. I drank water I didn't need. I checked the clock repeatedly, watching the minutes crawl by. The pressure of the dream still clung to my skin like residue I couldn't scrub away. The whisper had been so close, so intimate. Elias. It hadn't spoken like a person. It had spoken like a place, a cavern, a canyon, an expanse with no recognizable depth. A shape of awareness, not a voice. The thought made me shiver. At some point, I realized dawn wasn't far off. The blackness outside thinned slightly, turning into the kind of blue that precedes sunrise. The world hadn't broken apart in the night. The cabin was still standing. I was still alive. That was enough to let me breathe again. When the first real light began filtering through the window, I dressed and stepped outside, grateful for the cold morning air. My breath came out as a thin mist. The birds hadn't started yet, a detail that set me on edge, but at least the sky was visible again, pale and familiar. As I walked down the hill toward Mara's house, every branch seemed to watch me. The woods felt subtly rearranged, as though someone had reached down in the night and shifted the trees like pieces on a board. Nothing overt, nothing I could prove, just a sense of wrongness, faint but persistent. Mara was already outside, chopping wood with a rhythmic precision that suggested she needed the distraction. When she noticed me, she set the axe aside. "You look like hell," she said. "Did the ground hum last night? For you, I mean." She wiped her hands on her jeans. "No, only your side of the ridge." The implication landed heavily. "It's not dangerous," she added when she saw the panic in my expression. "Not immediately. That's not comforting. It wasn't meant to be. It was meant to be honest." I swallowed hard. I dreamed about the door. Mara went still, too still. "Did you touch it?" she asked, voice low. "In the dream," I admitted. "Just barely." She exhaled sharply, turning away for a moment as if steadying herself. "That's not ideal." "That's all you have to say? Not ideal?" "You're still here, aren't you?" she said with a seriousness that silenced me. "That means the connection isn't strong yet. But you need to be careful, Elias. Whatever stands behind that door doesn't see us the way we see ourselves." "What does it see?" She hesitated. "Reflection, possibility, something unfinished." That made no sense, or maybe it made too much sense. "And the whisper?" I asked. "It said my name." Mara's eyes tightened. "That's how it starts. It calls to the parts of you that are already vulnerable." "My guilt," she nodded. We stood in silence for a long moment, breath steaming in the cold. I felt exposed, like the dream had peeled something open inside me. "Elias," Mara said softly, "you need to understand something. The hollow isn't alive in the way we think of living things. It's not a creature. It's not a spirit. It's a tension, ancient and immense. It doesn't care if we worship it or fear it or try to understand it. It observes, and sometimes it presses back." "Why me?" Her answer was quiet but firm. "Because you're not at peace with yourself, and things like the hollow thrive on fractures." I wanted to argue, to deny it, but the truth clung to my silence. "Is there a way to stop the dreams?" I asked. "Not entirely," she said, "but you can delay them. Anchor yourself. Keep to the rules, especially the name rule. The woods listens when you introduce yourself." Cold crawled up my spine. "What happens if someone breaks the rules?" I asked. Mara looked past me, toward the pines. "They get noticed, and once you're noticed, it's hard to go back to being ignored." Before I could ask more, Mara stiffened. Her eyes locked on something behind me. I turned slowly. A man stood at the edge of the tree line. Tall, thin, dressed in clothes that were decades out of fashion, a flannel shirt faded to near gray, suspenders that looked handmade, boots cracked with age. His skin was pale in a way that didn't belong to daylight. His hair hung past his shoulders, thin and tangled. He wasn't moving, but he was looking at us. I froze. Mara's voice was barely a whisper. "Don't acknowledge him." Rule 1. I faced forward again, fighting the instinct to glance back. "Walk," Mara murmured. "Slowly. Don't run. Don't speak. And don't look for him again." We moved together toward her house, each step deliberate. My pulse pounded against my ribs. I could feel the man's eyes on us, pressing into my back like cold fingers. Mara opened her door and ushered me inside. Only when she shut it firmly did she allow herself to breathe. "He's been gone for years," she said, voice trembling. "He shouldn't be here." My blood turned to ice. "Who was he?" Mara stared at the floor, her expression hollow. "One of us," she whispered, "before he broke the rules." Mara didn't speak for a long time after that. She stood with her back against the door, one hand braced against the wood as if expecting something to push from the other side. I waited, letting the silence stretch. It felt safer than demanding answers she wasn't ready to give. Finally, she inhaled slowly, steadied herself, and turned toward me. "Sit," she said. I lowered myself onto a worn armchair near the window. Mara remained standing, arms crossed, gaze sharp like she needed elevation to say what she was about to say. "His name was Jonah Coyle," she began. "He lived up on the ridge about 10 years ago, give or take. He was a carpenter, good with his hands, quiet but not withdrawn. People liked him. And he asked too many questions." Her voice tightened on that last part, and I understood instinctively that she didn't mean normal curiosity, the kind that pulls threads loose from the fabric of reality, the kind I was already tugging at without meaning to. "What questions?" I asked. Mara glanced toward the window. "The kind that don't like being asked." I waited. The cabin creaked softly, its old bones shifting. "He was obsessed," she said. "He wanted to understand the hollow. He wanted to know what the humming meant, where the figures came from, why the woods twisted the way they did." "Did he break a rule?" Mara's jaw flexed. "He broke all of them." A chill crawled up my spine. "And what happened to him?" She hesitated. "He disappeared, but not in the way people do when they get lost. Not like walking into the woods and never coming back. One night he just wasn't Jonah anymore." "What does that mean?" She rubbed her temples as if trying to choose her words carefully. "Sometimes the woods take an interest in someone. When that happens, they don't vanish. They shift. They become part of something older, bigger, and whatever they were before stops mattering." I felt my stomach twist. "And the thing outside, that was Jonah? What's left of him?" Mara said. "And he shouldn't have been here. Not this close to dawn." Her voice lowered. "Daylight holds it back, usually." "Usually?" Mara didn't respond. She moved to the window and peered through the curtain. After a moment, she let it fall. "He's gone," she murmured, but her unease remained. I leaned forward in the chair. "Mara, what exactly are we dealing with? You keep saying the hollow isn't alive, that it's attention, that it observes, but that thing outside, Jonah, or what's left of him, that was a shape, a person, something real." "It's real," she said. "Just not in a way that fits into the rules of living things. The woods mold what they touch. Some people resist, some don't. And the rules protect us from that transformation?" She nodded. "In a way." I swallowed. "But you said there's a missing rule. Rule 6. Mara's expression tightened like a door slamming shut. "We're not talking about that." "Why not?" "Because knowing it does more harm than breaking it." I didn't understand. I wanted to ask more, but the look she gave me, it wasn't anger. It was fear. Not of me, but for me. So I let it go. "For now." She motioned toward the kettle on the stove. "Tea?" I nodded, needing something warm to hold. She busied herself in the kitchen, but her movements were stiff, distracted. Whatever she'd seen, whatever Jonah had become, had shaken her deeply. While she worked, I let my mind drift back to the dream door. The handle had been cold under my finger, as if carved from stone buried deep underground. The whisper, it hadn't been human. It had spoken my name with too many syllables, too much space between them, like it was stretching the sound to see how much meaning it could extract. I heard it again in my mind. Elias. A shiver ran through me. Mara placed a mug in my hands, the ceramic warm against my palms. "Drink," I did. It steadied me a little. We sat in silence for several minutes, the steam rising between us. Finally, I asked, "What does the humming mean? Really?" Her eyes drifted to the corners of the room as if she expected the walls to listen. "Yes, it means the hollow is searching," she said. "For what? For cracks, weaknesses, people poised on the edge of themselves." Her gaze locked on mine. People who can be opened. The phrase landed like a stone in my gut. Opened? How? You don't want the answer to that. But I already knew pieces of it. The whisper. The dream door. Jonah standing at the tree line, drawn thin by something that had hollowed him out. The mountain was old. Older than memory, older than the people who settled here, older than anything with a name. And it didn't devour. It transformed. Not out of malice, but because that's what old things do when younger things wander into their shadow. I exhaled shakily. You said the dream door leads somewhere. Mara's lips pressed into a thin line. It leads inward, outward, both. Neither. The doors show up when the hollow becomes interested in you. They're invitations. And if you open one, you go where Jonah went. I felt the world tilt slightly, as if gravity had shifted by a fraction. Then why did I dream about it? I whispered. Because you touched something the moment you stepped onto this mountain, she said, and something touched back. I stared down at the tea swirling in my mug. The surface rippled, not from movement, but from a faint vibration in the floorboards, barely noticeable, like a pulse too far away to hear clearly. My breath caught. Mara's head snapped up. Did you feel that? I nodded. She stood abruptly, eyes scanning the cabin. It shouldn't hum during daylight. What does it mean when it does? She moved to the door and pressed her palm against the wood. Her face paled. It means the hollow is closer than it should be. I stood too, every instinct screaming to run, despite knowing that running would only make things worse. Before either of us could speak again, something clicked outside, like a single twig snapping under a deliberate footstep. Mara froze. Another snap. Closer this time. A slow, deliberate rhythm. Step, step, step. Don't look, Mara whispered. A shadow passed across the window, tall and thin. My breath stopped entirely. The air thickened around us. Then a voice drifted through the door. Not a whisper, not a human call. Something stretched and patient. A voice shaped like a cavern. Elias. My knees weakened. No, Mara whispered, grabbing my wrist. That's not him. That's not Jonah. That's not anything you should answer. Another step. Just outside, the doorknob turned slightly. Only slightly. A test. Mara pulled me back from the door. You need to stay somewhere else tonight. Where? Her grip tightened. Where it can't follow, she said, if such a place still exists. Mara didn't open the door until the footsteps faded, not vanished, faded like sound dissolving into distance without actually moving away. Even then, she waited several minutes, her hand hovering above the knob, listening with a focus so absolute it felt contagious. I matched her stillness, barely breathing. Finally, she let out a slow exhale. It's gone, for now. She stepped back, shoulders tight, eyes still darting to the edges of the room as if expecting another shadow to peel itself free from the wall. I'd only known her a short time, but this was the first moment I saw something close to fear in her. Not tension, not alertness, fear. Where are we going? I asked. She didn't hesitate. Down the mountain. There's an old ranger outpost near the river. The hollow doesn't reach that far. A pause. Not easily. The implication sat like ice on my spine. And if it tries, it won't. She grabbed a canvas bag from the hook beside the door, or it'll be slow enough for us to outrun. That wasn't the reassurance she seemed to think it was. She handed me a jacket hanging near the stove. Put this on. Don't bring anything you don't need. Don't leave anything behind that you're attached to. Why? Because attachment is a door, she said, and it's already trying to open you. The words cut deeper than she knew. I followed her outside. The cold morning air had thickened, the edges of the forest still wrapped in a fine thread of mist. The trees whispered faintly, not from wind, but from something shifting among them, something choosing to remain unseen. We walked without speaking, our footsteps crunching on frost. After several minutes, Mara raised her hand, stopping us just before the trail bent east. Listen, she whispered. I did. For a moment, all I heard was my own pulse. Then, faint, distant, the low, resonant hum rolled across the ridge like a warning. It's daytime, I murmured. I know, she said. The hum grew stronger, then weaker, drifting as if scanning the woods for something. For me. The sound wasn't random, it moved with purpose, like a beacon hunting a signal. Keep walking, Mara said. Steady pace. Don't run. We continued. The deeper we went, the more the forest began to distort. At first, it was subtle, a branch curved slightly wrong, a shadow lingering too long. Then the path itself began to ripple, the packed dirt shifting beneath my boots as if rearranging its shape. Mara, I whispered. The ground. Don't acknowledge it, she snapped. Rule 1 echoed in my mind. Do not acknowledge the figure when it appears. But Mara had expanded that rule in spirit. Don't acknowledge anything that seems wrong, unfamiliar, hungry for attention. The hollow was built on reciprocity. Recognition was nourishment. We walked another half-mile before the distortion thinned, the ground firming beneath my feet. The humming faded into the distance like a tide pulling back. Only then did Mara speak again. You need to understand what happened, she said. It called your name. I noticed. That's not normal. I almost laughed. Define normal right now. Mara stopped walking and turned to face me. Figures don't speak. Jonah doesn't speak. Nothing from the hollow speaks. Not in human language, not with names. Her voice lowered to a gravelly murmur. If it spoke your name, it's because it's been listening to you for a long time. A cold rush of dread hollowed my gut. That doesn't make sense. I've only been here 3 days. That's not how time works here. She resumed walking. It doesn't notice you when you arrive. It notices you when you decide to come. And sometimes earlier. I tried to wrap my mind around it, failed, and chose instead to focus on the present. What does it want? Not want, Mara corrected. Wanting implies desire, intention. The hollow has neither. It's like gravity. It pulls whatever leans too near. And I'm leaning. You're fractured, she said. Cracks let the mountain see inside, and what it sees, it reflects. Breeze pushed through the trees, bringing the scent of pine and damp soil. For a moment, I thought I heard my sister's voice woven into it, light, distant, carried on threads of memory. Then it was gone. We reached a small stream crossing the trail. The water was clear and cold, rushing over smooth stones. Mara crouched and dipped her fingers into the current. Good, she murmured. Good? Running water resists the hollow. Not fully, but enough. She glanced at the forest behind us. Let's move faster. We followed the stream downhill. The trees grew denser, their trunks thicker, older. The path narrowed until it was barely wide enough for us to walk single file. Somewhere overhead, a crow cawed once, sharp, fractured, before going silent. I became aware gradually that the woods around us were shifting again. Shapes moved between the trees, tall, thin outlines, almost human, but not quite. Their forms wavered at the edges, as if the world hadn't finished deciding what they were supposed to look like. Mara, I whispered, are those? Keep your eyes forward, she said, voice tight. They're echoes. They can't cross the water, not easily. But they're following. Yes. Her tone left no room for debate. Don't look back. Don't give them shape. I fought the instinct to turn around. Every hair on my neck stood upright, sensing the presence behind us. Not close, but attentive. We reached a small clearing where the stream forked. A wooden sign leaned sideways, covered in moss. I brushed it clean. Outpost, the letters read. The rest was scratched away. How much further, I asked. A little over a mile, Mara said. If the hollow doesn't... She froze. I followed her gaze. Across the clearing at the edge of the trees, a door stood upright in the moss. Not attached to a building. Not held by hinges. Standing on its own. Dark wood. Stone handle. My breath vanished. That's it, I whispered. From my dream. No, Mara said, voice trembling. No, this isn't right. They don't appear in daylight. But it's here. The door pulsed softly as if lit from within by a heartbeat. The air thickened, pressing inward. A faint whisper seeped from the wood, too low to form words, yet unmistakably calling. Mara grabbed my arm and pulled me back. Don't go near it. Don't answer it. Don't let it see you seeing it. I'm not. Yes, you are, she hissed. You're listening. It can tell. The whisper grew louder, curling through the clearing like smoke. Elias. It spoke the name with more clarity now, as if proximity sharpened its tongue. The ground hummed, a deep, resonant shiver. Mara shoved me toward the stream. Cross. Now. I jumped over the narrow waterway just as the hum climbed in intensity. Mara followed, breathing hard. We backed away until the door blurred between the trees. Only then did the hum cease. "We have to move," Mara said. "It knows you're awake." "I'm not the one who woke it." "No," she said softly. "You're the one it's waking for." We ran. The forest watched. The door pulsed behind us, and for the first time since arriving in the hollow, I realized something terrible. The mountain wasn't hunting me. It was preparing me. We ran in silence, Mara's grip on my arm steady but firm. The further we moved from the clearing, the more the forest seemed to twist, as if our passage was being recorded, cataloged, remembered. Branches bent just slightly when we passed, shadows stretching a fraction too long, leaves falling where they hadn't been yesterday. It wasn't that the forest was alive in any ordinary sense, it was aware. And awareness, I was learning, had patience. The stream we'd crossed widened into a shallow river, its current stronger, icy against my legs as we waded through. Mara slowed, glancing over her shoulder. "It can't cross water easily, but it can watch. It can learn." I swallowed hard. "Learn what?" "How to wait," she said. Her voice was calm, almost flat, but the edges of it carried fear I didn't fully understand. How to wait for cracks to widen. How to tempt you into them. I kept my eyes forward, trying not to think of the door behind us, standing free, pulsing like a heartbeat I couldn't touch. I felt the pull of it in my chest, in my head, like the faint echo of a long-lost memory calling my name, asking me to answer. We reached a low ridge overlooking the riverbank. Mara stopped, crouching behind a boulder. She motioned for me to do the same. "Listen," she whispered. I froze, ears straining. For a moment there was only the rushing water, the wind moving through pines, the occasional bird call. Then, the hum, low, resonant, impossibly distant and impossibly close at once. It wasn't a sound in the ordinary sense, it was attention. It pressed against the back of my mind, probing, nudging, seeking. I felt it in my chest, under my ribs, in the hollow spaces behind my eyes. "Don't move," Mara said. "Not a muscle, not a breath that isn't measured. It's curious, it knows you're thinking about it." The hum rose slightly, rhythmic now. It pulsed in tandem with something inside me, though I couldn't tell if it was my heartbeat or something else, something foreign. "What happens if it finds me?" I asked, voice barely a whisper. Mara shook her head. "You can't imagine. Not fully. All I know is, don't give it a reason to notice. Don't invite it in." I understood, vaguely, that this wasn't about survival in the physical sense. It was about survival of thought, of self. The hollow didn't take bodies. It took awareness. It took fragments of consciousness and wove them into patterns of its own, leaving what remained stretched thin, hollowed, fragmented. We stayed behind the boulder for what felt like hours, crouched in cold shadows, listening to the hum that rose and fell like a living tide. The forest around us was silent in response, or maybe it was the hollow's silence. I couldn't tell which was worse. Finally, Mara exhaled. "It's gone for now," she said. Her shoulders sagged, relief barely visible beneath the tension that had become permanent. "We have to keep moving." I followed her downstream, staying as close to the water as possible. The riverbank was steep in places, roots and rocks making footing treacherous. Every step, every slip of dirt beneath our boots felt exaggerated, amplified, as if the mountain itself noted each motion and weighed it. At one point, I stumbled on a slick rock, nearly falling into the icy water. Mara's hand shot out, gripping my arm with a strength that surprised me. "Careful," she hissed. "Every mistake leaves a trace." "A trace of what?" I asked, breathless. "Of yourself," she said. "Of what you carry. It remembers. It remembers everything." I didn't respond because I suddenly realized she meant more than just the things I had brought with me. My bag, my coat, my notebook. She meant my guilt, my fear, my past. Every secret, every shame, every memory I'd buried could be read, reflected, used. I thought of my sister, of that night I had tried to outrun memory, of the mistakes that had followed me into adulthood. The hollow, if it truly was aware, could see all of it. And it didn't care. Eventually, we reached a clearing where the ranger outpost should have been. The building stood small and squat against the river's bend, half hidden in pines. Its wooden walls were gray with age, the roof sagging slightly, but it radiated a kind of safety I hadn't felt in days. Mara opened the door first, peering inside. "Still intact," she muttered. She stepped aside for me to follow. The interior smelled of damp wood and dust. A stove sat in the corner, unused for months, and a thin layer of grime covered the floorboards. Cobwebs clung to the corners, swaying slightly as if disturbed by invisible currents. "Good," Mara said. She moved to the stove and checked the flue. "If it reaches us here, it'll be through observation only. The walls slow it down. Water slows it down, but it will still wait." I sat heavily on a bench, feeling my muscles uncoil for the first time since leaving the cabin. My hands trembled, even after all the running. I wanted to close my eyes, to rest, to forget the pulsing hum and the whisper of my name. "You need to sleep," Mara said, crouching beside me. "Even a short rest, but you have to anchor yourself." "Anchor myself how?" I asked. She pulled a small notebook from her bag, handing it to me. "Write. Don't think about what you write. Just write facts. Names, places, what you see. The hollow can't touch what is committed to record." I took the notebook and pen with shaking fingers, scribbling the words almost blindly. The river, the trees, the pulsing in the distance. I wrote it all. The hum, the whisper, the door, Jonah Coyle, the rules. Every fragment, every feeling, every crack in myself. Hours passed. The light outside shifted imperceptibly. At some point, my eyelids grew too heavy to resist. I closed them, still clutching the notebook. And I dreamt again. The dream was different this time. There was no door. No whisper calling my name. There was only the river, stretching infinitely, reflecting stars that couldn't exist in the waking world. I was floating just above the water, weightless, watching shapes twist beneath the surface. Shapes that looked like me, shapes that looked like Mara, shapes that looked like Jonah Coyle, all stretching, elongating, folding into one another. I wanted to call out, I wanted to warn them, but no sound came. Then the hum began. Low at first, almost imperceptible, and then it rolled through the dream like a tidal wave. The water beneath me rippled and pulsed in response. Shapes began to rise, not as bodies, not as figures, but as a tension made visible, hollowed forms seeking acknowledgement. Elias, the name, not mine, not spoken as mine, but carried on the resonance of the water. I woke with a start, drenched in sweat. The notebook had slipped from my hands onto the floor, pages crumpled. I breathed in ragged gasps, the river outside now calm and unassuming in daylight. For a moment, I thought it had all been a dream. Then I saw the faint ripple of the water, unnatural and deliberate, moving upstream against the current. And I knew it had been watching, always, waiting, patient. Mara stirred beside me. "It knows you're awake," she whispered. I nodded, too exhausted to speak, understanding finally what she had meant. The hollow wasn't just attention. It was anticipation. It measured, it remembered, it waited. And I had already answered its first question. It was only the beginning. The morning air felt unnervingly still. Even the river, which had seemed a shield against the hollow, moved with an almost deliberate rhythm, its surface catching the sunlight in long liquid flashes that felt watched. I stayed inside the ranger outpost, staring at the water, notebook in hand, trying to convince myself that the events of the previous night had not fully bled into reality. But reality, I was beginning to understand, was a thin veil on this mountain, one that could be stretched, peeled, and observed. Mara moved quietly around the outpost, preparing a small fire, checking the windows, and muttering under her breath. I hadn't heard her speak much since we arrived. Her silence carried weight, each movement precise, almost ritualistic, as though the forest, or whatever it was beyond, could read her hesitations and mistakes. "You need to understand the rules," she said finally, breaking the silence. Her voice wasn't loud, but it had authority, gravity. "I've told you some. There are fewer than 8. Each is deliberate. Each exists because breaking them has consequences beyond comprehension." I nodded, trying to memorize her tone, the urgency behind her words. "Rule 1, she continued, never acknowledge the figure, whether it takes human form or not. Do not respond if it calls your name. Do not even think of responding." "Check," I said quietly. Rule 2, she went on, never follow the sound of movement into the forest alone. Curiosity is a door. Never open it willingly. Check, I repeated. Rule 3, and this is the hardest, never look into the water where the hollow has been active. Reflections are not always what they seem. They can deceive, replicate, or consume. I swallowed. So the river isn't safe? Safe enough if you respect it, but it remembers everything it has touched. Rule 4? She hesitated, as if the words themselves carried weight. Never try to map the mountain. Never try to record the positions of landmarks, paths, or doors. That information will be used against you. If you think you are learning the terrain, you are teaching it to notice you. I felt a chill recalling the dream where the river had bent impossibly and shapes had risen from its surface. Every instinct screamed at me that writing in the notebook, drawing a map in my mind, could be a lure, a trap. But Mara seemed to trust the notebook. Writing, in her explanation, was a way to anchor thought. Maps, however, were invitations. Rule 5, she said finally, never sleep too close to the hollow's interest. It is patient, yes, but it prefers the vulnerable. Sleep, yes, but always with anchor points, words, objects, routines. They slow it down. And Rule 6, I asked, though a knot had formed in my stomach. She had avoided it before. Mara's eyes flicked to the river, then back at me. Rule 6 is the one people rarely survive ignoring. I've told you before, we won't speak it aloud, but you will learn it, eventually. I nodded, understanding that this mountain, this hollow, was already shaping me, testing me. I felt my own thoughts stretching, folding, seeking cracks I hadn't known were there. The rules were lifelines, yes, but also prisons. A movement outside drew my attention. Shadows stretched unnaturally across the riverbank, swaying even though the wind didn't move. My pulse quickened. Mara followed my gaze, expression tightening. "It's watching," she murmured. "It's always watching." I wanted to protest, to argue that daylight should protect us, but the memory of Jonah Coyle, twisted and hollowed, pressed in on me. It didn't care about light or time. It only waited for fishers. Hours passed in a tense routine. We ate sparingly, drank from the river, and kept our movements deliberate. Mara occasionally whispered instructions, how to place the firewood to block lines of sight, how to ensure the door of the outpost remained unnoticeable from the forest, even how to fold blankets to create small, secure anchor points around the perimeter. Every gesture felt ritualistic, necessary, like protective incantations. As the sun began its slow descent, turning the river to molten gold, Mara finally spoke again. "You will need to face it," she said. I froze. Face it. Not willingly, she clarified, but it will appear. The hollow notices you whether you look or not. At some point, you will have no choice but to observe. You need to be ready. I swallowed hard, thinking of the pulsing door, the whisper calling my name, the river shapes that had mirrored and warped me in my dreams. What do I do when it appears? Anchor yourself, she said simply. It cannot consume what is recorded, committed, acknowledged in the right way, but it can twist what is fleeting, what is secret, what is fragile. It thrives on doubt, fear, shame. I realized then that the hollow did not operate like a predator. It didn't hunt for prey. It sought vulnerabilities. It studied, it mirrored, it pressed. And the more I feared, the more I gave it to work with. The first manifestation came just before dusk. A ripple across the river's surface, subtle but deliberate. Shadows shifted at the edges of the clearing. My stomach tightened. Then I saw it. A figure stepping from the trees, tall, thin, elongated, almost skeletal, yet strangely human. Its face was blank, save for eyes that seemed to reflect fragments of my own memories. I froze. Mara grabbed my arm, whispering, "Anchor yourself. Write it down in your mind. Do not speak. Do not respond." The figure's movements were deliberate, slow, impossible. It didn't hurry, but the pressure of its presence made the air thick. It stopped a few feet from the water, tilting its head as if examining me, learning me. It whispered, or perhaps the air itself did, "Elias." My chest tightened. My heart thumped violently, but I forced myself to breathe, to ground my awareness. I recalled Mara's instructions. Record every fact, every detail in your mind. Anchor yourself. I counted the figure's steps silently. I noted the way its shadows stretched unnaturally long, the subtle ripple of energy around it, the way the air thickened when it shifted its weight. I focused on each detail, refusing to imagine it as Jonah, as Mara, as anyone I knew. I simply cataloged. I observed. I survived. The figure lifted a hand toward the river, as if to touch its own reflection. I remembered Mara's warning about water. Reflections are not always what they seem. My mind recoiled, yet I anchored myself to the notebook in thought, to the physical world around me, to Mara's presence. And then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, it began to fade. Not vanished. Fading. Retreating. Observing. Waiting. I exhaled, legs shaking, heart pounding. Mara placed a hand on my shoulder. "Good," she murmured. "You endured. That's the first night. It will return. But you have learned to remain solid, to resist its pull." I nodded, though the exhaustion and fear weighed on me. I knew in some deep, gnawing way that surviving one encounter was not victory. It was only a delay, a reprieve. And as the last light of day slipped behind the mountains, the river glinting dark and still once more, I realized the hollow wasn't just in the woods, in the river, or in the door I had dreamed of. It was in me. It had already begun its work, and I had no choice but to endure, to anchor, and to wait for what would come next. The mountain was patient, and so was I, or so I hoped. Night fell with an oppressive weight. The river's surface had gone still, the faint golden glow of sunset replaced by cold silver moonlight. Inside the outpost, Mara had built a small fire. Its warmth was comforting, but it did little to dispel the sense that the forest outside was alive in a way that no ordinary forest could be. Every shadow seemed to move just slightly out of sync. Every sound carried a pattern that my mind couldn't map. I sat cross-legged on the floor, notebook open, trying to commit every detail of the day to memory. Mara watched me carefully, as if ensuring I did not falter. I realized then that survival here wasn't just physical. It was intellectual, emotional, almost spiritual. The hollow tested every part of you. "You must anchor yourself every night," Mara said, her voice low. "Do not sleep without it. If you let the mind wander freely, it will find the cracks, and you will be vulnerable." "I understand," I said, though the truth was that understanding felt fragile. How does one anchor against a thing that existed beyond comprehension? How does one resist what was patient, infinite, and indifferent? She poured herself a cup of tea and gestured for me to do the same. I obeyed, hands trembling slightly. The warmth seeped into my fingers, but not into the cold gnawing in my chest. "I need to tell you something," Mara said, her eyes flicking to the window. "Rule 7. I froze. She hadn't mentioned 7 before. "Always," she said carefully, "always speak your intentions aloud when moving through the forest. Not to it, not to any figure, but to yourself. Declare where you are going, what you are doing, and why. It keeps you grounded. The hollow hears movement, recognizes curiosity, but cannot fully interact with intentions spoken clearly." I nodded, absorbing the weight of it. The rules were growing in number, in complexity, in gravity. Each seemed absurd in isolation. Don't acknowledge, don't map, don't look, anchor. But together they formed a lattice against something I could barely perceive. The night deepened. I wrote in the notebook, cataloging every moment. The ripple of the river, the shapes between the trees, the pulsing door in my dream, the figure that had called my name. Words alone could not capture the feeling, the pressure, the gnawing emptiness beneath it all. But they were all I had. Around midnight I heard it, a subtle vibration beneath the floorboards like the echo of a drum, distant but intentional. I froze, pencil hovering over the page. Mara stiffened beside me, lips pressed tightly together. "It's close," she whispered, "but you're anchored. Remember your words, remember the fire, remember the river. Stay grounded." I focused, repeating the mantra in my mind. Observation, record, anchor. My pulse matched the vibration in the floor, steady, deliberate. The rhythm expanded, filling the room, brushing against the walls, brushing against my skull. Then a voice. Not a whisper, not human, a resonance that seemed to curl inside my chest. "Elias," my stomach dropped. The syllable was stretched, warped, as if sound itself had been folded into a living thing. I closed my eyes, breathed slowly, repeated my intentions aloud, softly, to myself. I am here. I am safe. I am observing. The voice paused, the vibration ceased, and I realized my words had not driven it away entirely. They had only slowed it, reminded it of boundaries. The presence lingered, patient, waiting for moments when I faltered. Hours passed. I dozed lightly, half-conscious, notebook in hand. Dreams came, fragmented and impossible. Shadows elongated across ceilings, shapes twisted under my eyelids. Every dream seemed to echo fragments of memory, my past mistakes, my guilt, my fears, but always in shapes that weren't mine. And always the door, standing upright in the forest, pulsing, always calling. I woke before dawn, drenched in sweat. The fire had dimmed, leaving only embers, but Mara was awake, staring out the window toward the river. They never leave completely, she said, voice low. Even during daylight, they wait and they watch. That is their nature. I nodded, too exhausted to speak. My notebook lay open on the floor, pages filled with hurried observations. I had tried to anchor myself, I had tried to record, to declare, to exist firmly within the rules, and yet I felt the hollow tugging at my consciousness, persistent, subtle, patient. Mara moved to the door and opened it slightly, peering outside. A soft breeze drifted in, carrying the scent of wet pine and moss. Beyond, the forest seemed impossibly still, too still. Daylight protects you, she said, but it does not save you. It only postpones the encounter. I looked down at my hands, trembling slightly. The weight of survival pressed on me in a way I had never experienced before. Each breath, each movement, each thought could be cataloged, recorded, observed, but not forgotten, not ignored. The hollow had already begun shaping me, testing me, understanding me in ways I did not fully comprehend. Mara returned inside, closing the door. She sat across from me, face pale in the flickering light. "You will need to face it directly," she said, voice quieter this time. "It will appear again, tonight or tomorrow. And when it does, you must anchor yourself more firmly than ever before. Observe without acknowledgement. Record without imagination. Be present without fear. That is the only way to survive its attention." I nodded, the enormity of her words pressing against my chest. I felt small, fragile, yet tethered by the rules she had taught me. Survival here was a matter of discipline, of awareness, of refusing to give the hollow the one thing it sought most, my unguarded self. Hours stretched. The sky began to pale, faint light creeping through the pines. I had written everything I could, cataloged everything I remembered, repeated my intentions aloud over and over. Yet the sense of something waiting just beyond perception never fully left. The hollow's presence was patient, indifferent, eternal, and I knew this. The mountain had chosen me. It had begun its work. Mara placed a hand on my shoulder. "Rest if you can. Tonight will be harder. It will test you in ways daylight cannot. Remember the rules. Remember your intentions. Remember yourself." I nodded again, my gaze fixed on the river outside. The water moved normally now, but I knew better. Beneath its surface, shapes twisted. Shadows lingered between the trees. The door pulsed somewhere in the dream world, or perhaps in reality. It was impossible to tell. I closed my eyes, exhausted, yet fully aware that sleep would not grant escape. The hollow waited, patient, infinite, and indifferent, and I had only begun to learn how to endure. Night came quickly, and with it a silence that felt both protective and predatory. Mara had extinguished the fire early, leaving only a faint glow of embers that cast trembling shadows across the walls of the outpost. I sat on the floor, notebook open, hands resting on the pages, muscles taut and ready. Every instinct screamed that the hollow was near, though I could see nothing through the darkened windows. "You must remain alert," Mara whispered. Her eyes scanned the interior as if even the walls themselves might betray some secret passage of attention. Even when it appears calm, it is calculating, observing, learning, waiting. I nodded. I wanted to ask how long it had been watching me already, but I knew the answer would not comfort me. Patience was the hollow's domain. Comprehension was mine to preserve only through discipline and rules. Hours passed. I kept my eyes open, counting my own heartbeat, listening to the river outside, listening to the forest. The river gurgled, steady and predictable, but beneath its surface, the memory of ripples from the previous night lingered. Somewhere, the mountain remembered everything. Then a shift in the air, a subtle tightening in my chest. Something moved outside. Not the wind, not an animal. It was deliberate, watching, attentive. Mara placed a hand on my arm. "It's beginning," she whispered. "Do not acknowledge. Do not move more than necessary. Anchor yourself." I focused on the notebook, running my fingers over the pages. Names, shapes, sounds, all recorded. My mind chanted silently. Observation, record, anchor. Observation, record, anchor. A shadow slipped across the window. Tall, thin, human, almost, but wrong. Its presence made the air heavy, bending it around itself, reshaping perception. My stomach clenched, the figure's head tilted, the air vibrating faintly as it exhaled, or perhaps just was. Elias, the syllable was stretched, warped, almost too long to be a single name. My pulse spiked. "Focus," Mara said. Her voice was calm but sharp. "Anchor, observe, record. Do not acknowledge." I followed the instructions, cataloging every detail, the shadow's height, the irregularity of its limbs, the way the light bent around it. I resisted the urge to fill in gaps with imagination, resisted the impulse to plead, to explain, to humanize. The figure raised an arm toward the river. A ripple formed along the surface, defying gravity, moving upstream against the current. My stomach dropped. Water, Mara had warned, could deceive. Reflections were dangerous. Shapes could rise from them, mirrors of myself or others, twisted and infinite. I repeated my mantra, soft but deliberate, observation. Record. Anchor. The figure's presence lingered, bending the air, curving the shadows, but it did not step inside the outpost. Mara's presence anchored me further. Her eyes never left mine, silently reminding me to remain steady. Minutes stretched into eternity. The figure tilted its head once more, then dissolved into the dark, leaving only a faint, residual hum that reverberated through the floorboards. My hands trembled, but I remained seated, grounded by the notebook and by the rules. When the danger had passed, or at least withdrawn temporarily, Mara exhaled. "Good," she said. "You maintained your anchor. You may. That is the first night fully tested, but it will return. And next time it will know more about you." I nodded, still shivering from the encounter. My muscles ached from tension, my mind felt stretched thin, but I understood her words. The hollow didn't strike out blindly. It learned, it remembered, and the more it remembered, the closer it drew to fracturing what remained of self. "Will it ever stop?" I asked, voice hoarse. "No," Mara said quietly. "It is infinite. It is older than these mountains, older than the forest, older than memory. It does not tire, it does not sleep, it simply waits, and it observes." I swallowed hard. "Then what's the point?" "The point," she said, voice steady, "is endurance, awareness, anchoring yourself. Each night you survive, each time you resist it, you maintain what it cannot take. That is all that matters." I stared at the darkened windows, seeing nothing and yet feeling the weight of countless unseen eyes. Shapes, shadows, whispers, all folded into the forest's infinite patience. I realized with a cold certainty that survival was not victory. It was only the continuation of the experiment, the stretching of consciousness, the fracturing and piecing together of self under relentless observation. Hours later, I finally allowed myself to lie down, hands still resting on the notebook, eyes half closed but alert. Sleep came in fragments, dreams filled with impossible geometry and twisted reflections of the day. The river moved against the laws of physics. The door from my dream appeared at the edge of the forest, pulsing, calling. Shadows that were almost human, observed silently from every corner. I woke to Mara shaking my shoulder. Dawn's light had begun to filter through the trees. The river gleamed pale and cold. My chest heaved, and for the first time I felt truly small, not just in size, but in comprehension, in being. "They never leave completely," Mara said, voice low. "Even during daylight, even when you think you are safe, they wait, patient, infinite. That is their nature, and now you understand it too." I nodded, swallowing the hollow fear that seemed to settle permanently in my chest. The mountain had chosen me, had begun its work, and the hollow's attention was no longer hypothetical. It was real, deliberate, waiting for the smallest fissure, the tiniest falter, the first whisper of doubt. Mara moved to the door and opened it slightly, peering out. The forest seemed normal, calm, but I knew better. Beneath the surface, attention lingered, watching, learning, patient. The river's surface remained deceptively placid. The shadows moved subtly at the edge of perception. Somewhere, the door from my dreams pulsed faintly, though it could not yet manifest fully in reality. You must remain vigilant, Mara said. Tonight, it will test you further. It will probe your weaknesses. You will face it again, but you are learning. That is all that matters. Endurance. Awareness. Anchoring. I nodded again, words unnecessary. I understood now that survival was not about fleeing or hiding. It was about maintaining presence, committing to the rules, resisting attention, anchoring thought. And as the first light of day illuminated the river, the pines, and the mountains beyond, I felt the slow, terrible certainty settle in. The hollow was patient, the hollow was infinite, and I had only begun to learn what it meant to endure. The day passed in a haze of quiet observation. Mara had moved about the outpost with the precision of someone rehearsing survival against an enemy she could neither name nor touch. I followed her movements closely, mimicking her gestures, cataloging each action in my notebook, not just to anchor myself, but to understand the discipline required to exist here. Every step felt deliberate, weighted with the knowledge that the mountain itself observed, absorbed, and remembered. By mid-afternoon, Mara finally spoke. "You need to know something about the forest itself," she said, lowering herself onto a bench beside the window. "The hollow is not separate from it. It does not travel like we do. It is embedded in the soil, in the roots, in the river, and in the air itself. It is everywhere, but only reveals itself to those it deems interesting." I tried to digest the statement, but the truth of it was unsettling in ways words could not fully capture. Everywhere I looked, the forest seemed unchanged, normal, but I could feel the subtle distortions. The way branches hung at angles they shouldn't, the way shadows pooled too long, the faint vibration in the air that carried attention instead of sound. "Interesting," I repeated. "Meaning me?" Mara's eyes met mine. "You have cracks. Everyone does. Some cracks are visible, some invisible. And when you step close to them, when you let curiosity or fear or guilt take over, the hollow notices. It doesn't act like a predator. It doesn't need to. All it does is wait, observe, and bend reality until the cracks widen themselves." I shivered. "So the rules, they're to prevent the cracks from widening?" "In part," Mara said. "But more than that, they keep you from giving the hollow more to work with. Every action, every acknowledgement, every fleeting thought that slips into the wrong space, it becomes material for it. The rules are shields, but shields are fragile if not used correctly." I nodded, feeling the weight of her words settle into my chest like a stone. Survival here was less about fighting and more about enduring, observing, and being precise in every detail of existence. As evening approached, Mara prepared a meager meal. We ate in silence, the only sound the river outside had moving with deceptive calm. My stomach churned, knowing the night would bring another encounter, and perhaps a deeper test of endurance. By the time darkness fell again, the forest had become something almost sentient, every shadow and movement carrying weight. Mara positioned herself by the window while I sat on the floor, notebook open. "It will come tonight," she said. "You must be ready, not just to see it, but to maintain yourself in its presence." I nodded, gripping the notebook, repeating the mantra in my mind. Observation, record, anchor. Observation, record, anchor. Hours passed. The wind rose, shifting through the pines, carrying the scent of wet earth and distant decay. Every rustle made me tense, every snap of a twig an immediate focus of attention. Then, from the darkness beyond the outpost, movement. Subtle, deliberate, impossible. I froze. Mara's hand rested lightly on my shoulder. "Anchor yourself," she whispered. "Observe, record, do not acknowledge." The figure emerged from the edge of the trees. It was taller than the tallest man I'd ever seen, thin, stretched in ways that were anatomically impossible. Its limbs moved in slow, deliberate motions. Its face, blank, reflected fragments of my own memories, twisting them into something unrecognizable. Elias, the name came again, elongated, warped. My pulse spiked, but I forced myself to breathe, to catalog, to observe. I counted the figure's steps silently, noted the angle of its limbs, the way shadows bent unnaturally around it. I did not speak. I did not flinch. It reached the river and paused, tilting its head toward the water. The surface rippled unnaturally, a reflection not my own, but something foreign, something that twisted and writhed as if alive. My stomach turned, and I focused harder on my notebook, anchoring myself to thought, to words, to reality. Minutes passed, each one stretching into an eternity. The figure tilted its head again, then withdrew into the shadows, leaving only the faint hum that reverberated through the floorboards. I exhaled slowly, realizing that the first true test of endurance had passed. I had observed without acknowledgement. I had recorded without imagination. I had anchored myself. But Mara's gaze told me this was only the beginning. She moved to the door and opened it slightly, peering into the forest. The shadows seemed normal again, the night silent. "It will return," she said, "and it will know more about you next time." I nodded, understanding that survival was an ongoing process, a series of repetitions, tests, and careful anchoring. The Hollow's attention was infinite, its patience inexhaustible, and it would continue to push, probe, and bend the edges of my mind. I lay down on the floor, hands clutching the notebook, and closed my eyes. Sleep came reluctantly, fractured, dream-filled. Shapes that were almost human rose from the river, twisted reflections of myself and Mara, the door from my dreams pulsing at the edge of perception. The Hollow's presence was patient, infinite, and indifferent. When I awoke, the pale light of dawn was just beginning to filter through the pines. The river shimmered silver. The outpost felt fragile, almost sacred, a small island of stability in a world that had begun to erode the edges of reality. Mara was awake, sitting quietly, her gaze fixed on the river. "They never leave completely," she said softly. "Even in daylight, even when you think you are safe, they wait. Patient. Infinite. That is their nature." I nodded, feeling the weight of her words settle in my chest. The Hollow's attention was no longer hypothetical. It was deliberate, persistent. And I had already begun to experience it, its subtle probing, its twisting of perception, its reflection of the self in ways that were both intimate and incomprehensible. Mara placed a hand on my shoulder. "Tonight will be harder. It will test you in ways daylight cannot. You must remain vigilant. Anchor yourself. Remember the rules. Remember your intentions. Remember yourself." I nodded again. Survival was not about fleeing or hiding. It was about maintaining presence, committing to the rules, resisting attention, anchoring thought. And as the first light of day illuminated the river, the pines, and the distant mountains, I realized with a cold certainty the Hollow was patient. The Hollow was infinite, and I had only begun to learn what it meant to endure. The day moved with slow inevitability, each hour carrying its own weight of tension. Mara moved quietly around the outpost, performing the same checks she had made the previous days, arranging the firewood, inspecting the door, making sure nothing within the room could serve as an invitation to the Hollow. I followed her movements as best I could, anchoring myself to every detail, cataloging it mentally, and writing in my notebook whenever possible. The discipline was exhausting, but necessary. Survival here depended not on strength, but on presence, on meticulous attention to detail, and on adherence to the rules. By late afternoon, Mara paused near the window, her face illuminated by the fading sunlight. "You need to understand the forest itself," she said, her voice low, serious. "It is not merely the Hollow that you face. The mountain, the river, the trees, they are all part of it. Every leaf, every root, every shadow carries information, and it is all fed back to the Hollow. It does not need to move to act. It is everywhere and nowhere, observing, learning." I swallowed, trying to comprehend the enormity of what she was saying. I had imagined the Hollow as a figure, a shadow, a door, something I could identify, perhaps even evade. But Mara's words made clear that it was not something that could be evaded. It was not a creature in the traditional sense. It was attention, folded and infinite, manifesting through perception and memory. It existed wherever I existed, not as a physical presence, but as a distortion of reality itself. And it noticed me because, I began, hesitating. Mara's gaze met mine. Because you have cracks, all of us do. Curiosity, guilt, shame, memory, desire. They are all cracks. And when you step close to them, when you let them surface, the hollow notices. It does not act as a predator does. It does not strike. It waits. It watches. It bends reality until the cracks widen themselves, until it can observe you more fully, and you can observe yourself less clearly. I shivered. Every instinct told me that the cracks she spoke of were already present in me, already widening, already exposed to scrutiny I could barely comprehend. The rules, do not acknowledge, do not follow, do not look, anchor yourself, were my only protection against a force I could neither see fully nor fight. Evening came. Mara prepared a sparse meal. We ate in silence, the only sound the constant murmur of the river outside. The calm of daylight was deceptive. Shadows stretched unnaturally, the wind whispered faintly through the trees, carrying a scent of damp pine and soil that seemed almost conscious. When night arrived, the forest's presence became more tangible. The shadows moved with intent, subtle but deliberate. The air felt heavier, as though every breath I took was measured and recorded. Mara positioned herself by the window while I remained on the floor, notebook open, hands resting on the pages. "It will appear tonight," she said, her voice calm but taut with tension. "You must not flinch, not speak, not think in ways that feed it. Observe, record, anchor. That is all you can do." Hours passed. The wind rose, rustling the pines, every sound amplified in my consciousness. Then from the darkness at the edge of the clearing, movement, a shift in shadows, too deliberate to be natural. I froze. Mara's hand rested lightly on my shoulder. "Anchor yourself. Observe. Record. Do not acknowledge." The figure emerged. Taller than any man, thin to the point of impossibility, its limbs stretching and bending unnaturally. Its face, blank and reflective, showed fragments of my own memories, twisted and unrecognizable. The air thickened around it, the shadows bending in impossible angles. Elias? The name, elongated and warped, resonated in the air. My pulse spiked. My chest tightened. I focused. I counted its steps, noted the angle of its limbs, cataloged every detail in my mind, refusing to fill gaps with imagination. Every movement, every subtle distortion, I committed to memory, anchoring myself against fear. It moved to the river and paused, tilting its head toward the water. The surface rippled unnaturally, moving against the current, defying physics. Mara's warning returned. Reflections are dangerous. They twist, they deceive, they consume. I anchored myself harder, clinging to the notebook, to Mara's presence, to the rules. Minutes passed, stretched, elongated into an eternity. The figure tilted its head once more, then began to withdraw, dissolving into the dark. Only the faint hum lingered, reverberating through the floorboards and through my chest. My hands trembled, but I did not move beyond recording and observing. I remained anchored, present, aware. When the figure disappeared entirely, Mara exhaled quietly. "Good," she murmured. "You maintained your anchor. That is the first full night, but it will return. It always returns, and next time it will know more about you." I understood. Surviving the first encounter was not victory. It was only a delay, a momentary reprieve. The Hollow learned, remembered, adapted, and the more it learned, the more it could exploit. "You will be tested more," Mara said, her voice steady but heavy. "It will probe your mind, your memories, your fears. It will bend your perception. You must endure. That is all that matters." I nodded, my chest tight with exhaustion and understanding. The Hollow was patient, infinite, and it would continue, night after night, bending the edges of my perception, probing the cracks Mara had warned me about. As I lay on the floor, notebook clutched to my chest, I realized that the Hollow was not outside only, it was inside. It had begun its work within me, shaping me through attention and reflection, through subtle, relentless observation. When I finally allowed myself to drift into sleep, it was fractured, filled with dreams of impossible geometry and reflections of my own fractured self. Shapes rose from the river, twisted and writhing. The door from my dreams pulsed at the edge of perception, always calling, always waiting. And as dawn began to break, the pale light casting long shadows across the river, Mara's words echoed in my mind. They never leave completely. Even in daylight, even when you think you are safe, they wait, patient, infinite. That is their nature. I understood, finally, the weight of endurance. Survival was not a matter of fleeing or hiding. It was a matter of presence, of discipline, of observing, recording, anchoring, and resisting the subtle pull of attention that sought to unmake me. And in the quiet light of the mountains, I felt the first terrible certainty of all. The hollow was patient. The hollow was infinite, and I had only begun to learn what it meant to endure. The days and nights began to blur, each indistinguishable from the last, bound together by the same rigid discipline, the same constant vigilance. Mara had established a routine: morning observations, careful meals, cataloging, and anchoring before nightfall. Yet even within this structure, the mountains shifted beneath us, subtle and relentless. I noticed things I had not before, the way shadows never aligned with their sources, like how birds moved in patterns too deliberate to be natural, how the river sometimes pulsed with a rhythm that felt deliberate, as though counting, measuring, waiting. Mara rarely spoke unless necessary, but when she did, her words cut through the tension like a blade. "You will begin to notice patterns," she said one afternoon. "Small things, subtle repetitions. They are not coincidences. The hollow organizes reality. It tests you through consistency, through observation. And when you notice, when you try to understand, it notes that too." I swallowed. The weight of her words pressed deep into my chest. The hollow was not merely a figure, a shadow, or a door. It was a network, a presence interwoven with the mountain itself. Everything I observed, everything I cataloged was seen and recorded. And yet I had to continue, because awareness was my only defense. That night, the forest seemed quieter than ever. The river moved with deceptive stillness, the wind stilled as if the mountain itself were holding its breath. Mara prepared the outpost, arranging the fire, ensuring that our movements were deliberate, precise. I sat on the floor, notebook open, hands trembling slightly as I repeated the mantra silently. Observe, record, anchor. Hours passed. The shadows shifted at the edges of perception. I could hear faint, impossible rhythms beneath the floorboards, subtle vibrations that seemed to pulse in sync with my heartbeat. Then, a figure emerged, tall, impossibly thin, limbs bending in ways they should not. Its face, blank and reflective, held fragments of memories, warped and twisted. Elias. The name reverberated again, stretched and warped. My pulse surged. I gripped the notebook, refusing to acknowledge the figure, cataloging each impossible detail. I counted its steps, noted the angle of its limbs, the distortion of the shadows, the way the air thickened around it. My chest ached, but I remained still, anchored. It moved toward the river, tilting its head to watch the reflection. The water rippled unnaturally, flowing upstream against gravity. Mara's warning came to mind. Reflections are dangerous. They are portals of observation, mirrors of self, twisted and infinite. I anchored harder, repeating intentions aloud in a low, steady voice, clinging to my presence, my awareness, my identity. Time stretched. The figure tilted its head once more, and then retreated into the shadows. A faint hum lingered, vibrating through the floor and through my bones. I remained still, anchored, aware, cataloging every detail. When the danger passed, Mara exhaled quietly. "You maintained your anchor," she said. "Good, but it will return, and next time it will know more about you." The exhaustion was absolute. My muscles ached, my mind felt stretched thin, yet I understood. Survival was not about victory. It was about endurance. Each night, each observation, each act of grounding was a test of persistence against a patient. Infinite intelligence that sought not to kill, but to consume perception itself. Days passed, blending into nights. Sleep became fractured, dreams impossible and vivid. I saw shapes rising from the river, twisted reflections of myself, Mara, and others I barely remembered. The pulsing door appeared at the edge of the dream world, calling, patient, awaiting. Every fragment of memory, every secret, every fear was pulled into the patterns of the hollow, folded, mirrored, stretched. One afternoon, Mara spoke again. "You will need to confront curiosity," she said, her eyes distant. "The hollow tests it relentlessly. You will be tempted to understand, to follow, to name, to categorize beyond the rules. Do not. Curiosity is a door. Do not open it." I nodded, knowing she spoke from experience. Jonah Coyle had been a warning, but also a lesson. The price of curiosity was the hollowing of self. The rules were absurd, yet necessary. Do not acknowledge, do not follow, do not look, anchor, declare intentions aloud. They were shields against perception itself, fragile yet essential. That night, the first test of my understanding came. The figure appeared sooner than usual, emerging from the darkness near the riverbank. I froze, clutching the notebook. Its limbs bent impossibly, shadows twisted in impossible angles. The blank face reflected fragments of my memories, warped and indistinguishable from the truth. "Elias," I inhaled, reciting intentions aloud, cataloging details, counting steps, noting distortions. The water rippled, flowing upstream, reflecting shapes that were both me and not me. I focused on the notebook, on Mara's presence, on my own breath. Anchor, anchor, anchor. The figure raised an arm toward the river, and the reflection shifted violently, shapes folding, merging, then vanishing. I felt a tug at the edges of consciousness, a pressure that threatened to unmake me. But I forced my mind back to observation, to recording, to awareness. Minutes passed as if stretched to infinity. The figure tilted its head, then withdrew into the shadows. A faint hum lingered, resonating through the floor, through the walls, through my chest. My hands trembled, but I remained seated, anchored, vigilant. Mara exhaled softly. "You endured," she said. "That is all that matters. You anchored, you observed, you resisted." I nodded, understanding the full weight of her words. Surviving the first night fully tested was only a reprieve. The hollow was infinite, patient, and persistent. It would continue to probe, to observe, to test. And the cracks, the curiosity, the fear, the memories would always exist, waiting for the slightest lapse. When I finally lay down on the floor, notebook clutched to my chest, sleep came reluctantly. Dreams were fragmented, geometries impossible, reflections twisted. Shapes rose from the river, the door pulsed at the edge of perception, calling, waiting. The hollow's presence was patient, infinite, and indifferent. I awoke at dawn, pale light filtering through the pines. The river glimmered silver. Mara was awake, sitting silently, her gaze fixed on the water. "They never leave completely," she said softly. "Even in daylight, even when you think you are safe, they wait, patient, infinite. That is their nature." I nodded, understanding. Survival was not about hiding or fleeing. It was about presence, discipline, and resisting the subtle pull of attention that sought to unmake me. And as the light spread across the mountains, illuminating the river and forest, I understood the truth that Mara had always known. The hollow was patient, the hollow was infinite, and I had only just begun to learn what it meant to endure. The following day carried an almost unbearable stillness. The forest under the glare of daylight seemed deceptively benign. Yet I felt the mountain's patient awareness pressing in, a subtle weight on my thoughts. Mara moved through the outpost with her usual precision, checking the firewood, adjusting the windows, and whispering directions I repeated silently to myself. Every action had to be exact. Even a minor lapse could invite the hollow's attention. "You've noticed patterns," Mara said quietly as we prepared our sparse meal. "Shadows that linger too long, the wind moving in strange rhythms, reflections in the river that aren't what they should be. That is the hollow organizing reality. It tests you through repetition, through observation. When you notice, when you try to understand, it notes that too." I nodded, feeling the invisible pressure pressing deeper. The hollow was not merely a presence, but a force of attention, infinite and patient, embedded in the very mountain, the trees, the river. My awareness of it was a double-edged sword, necessary for survival, yet the more I understood, the more I realized how small and fragile I truly was. Night fell with unnatural rapidity, and the forest seemed to hold its breath. Mara arranged the outpost's defenses, firewood, anchors, routines. While I sat on the floor, notebook open, repeating the mantra silently: observe, record, anchor. Each repetition fortified my fragile grasp on reality. Hours passed, the wind rose, carrying the scent of wet pine and soil, though no branches moved. Then a subtle vibration beneath the floorboards, a faint resonance that seemed synchronized with my heartbeat. Mara's hand rested lightly on my shoulder. "It begins," she whispered. "Anchor yourself, observe, record. Do not acknowledge." The figure appeared at the edge of the clearing. Taller than any man, impossibly thin, limbs bending at angles that defied anatomy. Its face, blank and reflective, held fragments of my memories, warped and twisted. Elias. The name reverberated, elongated and warped. My chest tightened. I focused, counting its steps, cataloging the angle of its limbs, the distortion of shadows, the subtle shifts in the air. I refused to imagine, refused to plead or explain, refusing to give it the satisfaction of acknowledgement. It moved toward the river and paused. The surface rippled against the current, an impossible defiance of nature. Mara's warning echoed. Reflections were dangerous. They twisted reality, became portals for observation. I anchored myself to the notebook, to Mara, to my own breath, reciting my intentions aloud in a low, steady tone. Minutes stretched, each one feeling infinite. The figure tilted its head, then withdrew into the shadows. Only a faint hum remained, vibrating through the floor, through my chest. My hands trembled, but I remained still, anchored, vigilant. Mara exhaled softly. "You endured," she said. "You anchored, you observed, you resisted. That is all that matters." I nodded, exhaustion pressing on me from every direction. The first full night's test had been survived, but it was only a reprieve. The hollow was infinite, patient, and persistent. Every crack in me, curiosity, fear, guilt, was noted, remembered, and probed. The rules, absurd and fragile as they seemed, were the only shield against total collapse. Sleep came in fragments. Dreams were impossible geometries. Reflections of my own mind folded, twisted, multiplied. Shapes rose from the river. The door from my dreams pulsed at the edge of perception, always calling, patient, waiting. Every secret, every fear, every memory was pulled into its endless observation, reshaped and returned as something alien. At dawn, the pale light revealed the river's deceptive stillness. Mara was already awake, gazing silently at the water. "They never leave completely," she said softly. "Even in daylight, even when you think you are safe, they wait, patient, infinite. That is their nature." I nodded. Survival was not about hiding or fleeing. It was about presence, discipline, anchoring, and resisting the subtle pull that sought to unravel me. Days bled into nights, and the hollow's presence became increasingly palpable, testing the edges of perception in subtle, almost imperceptible ways. Shadows lingered too long, patterns repeated themselves, and reflections twisted reality into something both familiar and incomprehensible. Every time I thought I understood, I realized I had only scratched the surface. One evening, Mara spoke of curiosity, the force the hollow exploited relentlessly. "You will feel the pull," she said. "To understand, to name, to follow, that is the test. Do not give in. Curiosity is a door. Do not open it." I nodded, recalling Jonah Coyle, whose failure to resist had led to something unrecognizable, hollow, lost to observation and reflection. The rules were not arbitrary. Each was a lifeline, a shield, a tether to preserve self against infinite patience. Night came. The figure appeared earlier than expected, moving with the deliberate precision of something that knew the terrain intimately. I clutched the notebook, observing, recording, anchoring. Its limbs bent impossibly. Its face mirrored fragments of myself and Mara, warped and Elias. The elongated call reverberated through the air. I cataloged every detail, the shadows, the ripples in the river, the distortion of space. I recited my intentions aloud, anchored myself to the notebook, to Mara, to the present. The figure raised its arm toward the river. The water rippled violently, shapes folding, merging, caught, vanishing. The tug at the edges of consciousness pressed harder, threatening to unmake me, but I forced awareness back into observation, recording, anchoring. Minutes, stretched into infinity, passed. The figure tilted its head, then withdrew into darkness, leaving only the faint hum reverberating through the floorboards. My hands trembled, but I did not flinch. Mara exhaled softly. "You endured," she said. "That is all that matters. You anchored, you observed, you resisted." I nodded, knowing the truth. Survival was not about victory, it was about endurance. The hollow was infinite, patient, persistent. The cracks, the curiosity, the fear, the memories were always present, waiting for a lapse. As I lay on the floor, notebook clutched, sleep finally took me. Dreams were fragmented, geometries impossible, reflections twisted, shapes rose from the river, the door pulsed at the edge of perception. The hollow's presence was patient, infinite, and indifferent. At dawn, pale light filtered through the pines. Mara's voice cut the quiet. They never leave completely, even in daylight. Even when you think you are safe, they wait, patient, infinite. That is their nature. I understood. Survival was not about hiding. It was about anchoring, presence, discipline, resisting the subtle pull of attention. And I knew with a cold certainty, the hollow was patient. The hollow was infinite. And I had only begun to learn what it meant to endure. The days merged into nights, and the rhythm of survival became almost ritualistic. Dawn brought a fragile light across the Appalachian peaks, painting the river silver, the pines long and dark against the sky. Mara moved silently through the outpost, performing the checks she had taught me, adjusting windows, stacking firewood, inspecting the small perimeter we had established. Every motion was precise, deliberate, practiced. I mirrored her, recording every detail in my notebook, repeating the mantra of anchoring silently. Observe, record, anchor. Yet beneath the disciplined calm of daylight, the mountain's presence pressed constantly. Shadows lingered a second too long. Branches moved with subtle intent. The river pulsed in rhythm too deliberate to be natural. Every small anomaly felt purposeful, part of a network of attention I could neither map nor control. Mara spoke rarely during the day, but when she did, it was always to illuminate patterns I might have overlooked. "They observe everything," she said once, voice quiet, almost reverent. "The hollow notices cracks, moments of curiosity, fear, shame, memory, and it will test you through those cracks. You cannot fight it directly. You endure, you anchor, you record. That is all you can do." I nodded, feeling the invisible pressure pressing deep into my chest. The hollow was not merely a figure, a shadow, or a door. It was a force, an intelligence, patient, infinite, and embedded in everything around us. Survival depended not on strength or cunning, but on meticulous discipline and absolute presence. Night fell again, quicker than I expected, and the forest held its breath. Mara prepared the outpost, arranging firewood, closing windows, checking the anchoring points we had established. I sat on the floor, notebook open, heart taut with anticipation. Observe, record, anchor, I repeated silently, each word a tether keeping me intact. Hours passed. The wind rose in subtle eddies through the pines, carrying a faint scent of wet earth. Then a vibration beneath the floorboards, subtle but deliberate, thrummed in sync with my pulse. Mara's hand rested lightly on my shoulder. "It begins," she whispered. "Anchor yourself. Observe. Record. Do not acknowledge." From the darkness at the edge of the clearing, a figure emerged. Taller than any human, impossibly thin, its limbs bending in ways that defied anatomy. Its face was blank, reflective, mirroring fragments of memories twisted into something alien. "Elias," the elongated, warped call reverberated through the air. I held my notebook tightly, counting its steps, noting angles, distortions, the subtle curving of shadows. I refused to imagine, to plead, to humanize. I anchored to the notebook, to Mara, to the present moment, repeating intentions aloud in a low, steady tone. The figure moved toward the river, tilting its head toward the water. The surface rippled against the current, impossible, defying gravity and expectation. Reflections, the hollow's trickiest weapon. I tightened my focus, anchoring harder, cataloging every detail, reciting the mantra like a protective spell. Minutes stretched into something eternal. The figure tilted its head, paused, then withdrew into the shadows, leaving only a faint hum vibrating through the floor in my chest. Trembling, I remained still, anchored, vigilant. Mara exhaled softly. "You endured. That is all that matters. You anchored. You observed. You resisted." I nodded, knowing she spoke the truth. Survival was not victory. It was endurance against an infinite, patient force that sought not destruction, but the unraveling of attention itself. The cracks in me, curiosity, fear, guilt, were constants, openings the hollow would exploit. The rules were my only defense. Sleep came reluctantly, fractured, filled with impossible geometries and reflections of a mind stretched thin. Shapes rose from the river, twisted into unrecognizable forms. The door from my dreams pulsed at the edge of perception, calling, patient, waiting. Each secret, each fear, each memory was absorbed into the hollow's perception, reshaped and returned as something alien. Dawn arrived pale and quiet. Mara was already awake, watching the river. "They never leave completely," she whispered. "Even in daylight, even when you think you are safe, they wait, patient, infinite. That is their nature." I nodded, understanding the full gravity of her words. Survival was not about hiding or fleeing. It was about presence, anchoring, discipline, resisting the subtle pull that sought to unravel me. Days and nights passed. The hollow's attention grew more intricate, probing edges of perception in subtle, almost imperceptible ways. Shadows lingered, patterns repeated, reflections bent reality. Each observation, each act of anchoring, each moment of endurance was a fight, silent but absolute. The rules, do not acknowledge, do not follow, do not look, anchor, declare intentions aloud, remained my only shield. Mara spoke again of curiosity. "It is their preferred weapon," she said. "The pull to know, to name, to follow. That is the crack it tests most rigorously. You will feel it. You must resist. Curiosity is a door. Do not open it." I remembered Jonah Coyle, whose surrender to curiosity had been his undoing, leaving him hollowed, broken, a cautionary reflection of what became of those who faltered. The hollow did not need to strike, it merely observed, and it bent perception until the cracks became unmanageable. Night fell. The figure appeared sooner than expected, moving with deliberate precision, intimate knowledge of the terrain evident in each impossible step. I clutched the notebook, observing, recording, anchoring, its limbs bent in impossible angles, its face mirrored fragments of my mind, warped and alien. Elias, the call stretched through the air. I cataloged everything, the shadows, the ripples, the distortion of space, and recited intentions aloud, anchoring myself to the notebook, to Mara, to reality. The figure raised its arm toward the river. The water pulsed violently, shapes folding, merging, vanishing. Pressure tugged at the edges of consciousness, threatening to unmake me. I forced awareness back into observation, into recording, into anchoring. Minutes passed, stretched into eternity. The figure tilted its head, then withdrew, leaving the faint hum vibrating through the outpost. Trembling, I remained anchored. Mara exhaled softly. "You endured. That is all that matters. You anchored. You observed. You resisted. I understood. Survival was endurance, not victory." The hollow was infinite, patient, and persistent. Cracks, curiosity, fear, memory would always exist, waiting. The rules, absurd as they seemed, were lifelines. Finally, lying on the floor, notebook clutched to my chest, I felt sleep approach. Dreams were fragmented, impossible, full of rising shapes, pulsing doors, reflections twisted beyond recognition. The hollow's presence was patient, infinite, indifferent. At dawn, pale light crept across the river and forest. Mara whispered, "They never leave completely, even in daylight, even when you think you are safe. They wait, patient, infinite. That is their nature." I understood. Survival was not about hiding, it was about anchoring, presence, and resisting the subtle pull of attention. And as the mountains shone silver under the new light, I knew with certainty the hollow was patient. The hollow was infinite. And I had only begun to learn what it truly meant to endure. The days became measured in shadows, the nights in pulses of attention I could not escape. Dawn and dusk held no relief, the mountain's presence pressed on me even in daylight. Mara moved about the outpost with the same deliberate care, performing the routines she had taught me, her eyes constantly alert. I followed her, every action precise, every movement catalogued, repeating the mantra silently: observe, record, anchor. I had begun to notice the subtle ways the hollow exerted influence beyond direct encounters. The river pulsed unnaturally at times, bending against its own current. Branches and leaves swayed in patterns that suggested intention, not wind. Reflections in the water twisted moments of memory, and I caught glimpses of shapes that mirrored my own movements, only slightly delayed, almost wrong. Mara spoke to me rarely during the day, but when she did, it was always to illuminate a lesson. "It notices," she said, voice low. "Everything you do, everything you allow yourself to think, it catalogs. The cracks, the fleeting doubts, the half-formed curiosities, they are everything to it, and it will test you through them." I understood now that the hollow's reach was infinite, its patience inexhaustible. I was not battling it directly. I was enduring. Presence was my shield, anchoring my consciousness, keeping me intact against observation that could bend reality itself. Night arrived, and the forest seemed heavier than usual. The river shimmered faintly under the stars, its surface calm, yet carrying the weight of countless observations. Mara checked our precautions, adjusted the fire, and moved with quiet precision. I sat on the floor, notebook open, repeating silently, observe, record, anchor. Each repetition grounded me, tethered me to myself. Hours passed, the wind whispered through the pines, carrying the scent of damp soil. Then, from the darkness, a subtle shift, a deliberate, almost imperceptible movement at the edge of perception. Mara's hand rested lightly on my shoulder. "It begins," she whispered. "Anchor yourself. Observe. Record. Do not acknowledge." The figure appeared. Taller than any human, impossibly thin, limbs bending at angles that should not exist. Its face was blank and reflective, mirroring fragments of memories twisted beyond recognition. Elias, the name stretched and warped. My pulse quickened, but I focused. I cataloged every detail, the angles of limbs, the bending shadows, the distortion in the air, the way the river's reflection rippled unnaturally. I repeated intentions aloud, anchoring myself to Mara, to the notebook, to the present moment. The figure approached the river. The water rose slightly, pulsing against the current, and bathed had reflecting images that were both me and not me. I anchored harder, resisting the subtle tug of fear, of curiosity, of doubt. Time stretched into something eternal. The figure tilted its head, then withdrew into the shadows. A faint hum remained, vibrating through the floor, through the walls, through my chest. My hands trembled, but I stayed anchored, observing, recording. Mara exhaled softly. "You endured. That is all that matters. You anchored, you observed, you resisted." I nodded. Survival was not victory. It was endurance. The hollow was infinite, patient, relentless. Every crack in me, the fear, the memory, the curiosity, was a point of potential collapse. The rules, absurd and fragile as they seemed, were my only protection. Sleep came reluctantly, fragmented, impossible. Dreams were filled with twisted geometries, rivers flowing backward, shapes rising from the water, the door pulsing at the edge of perception. Each dream folded parts of my consciousness into the hollow's network, reshaping, testing, stretching. At dawn, pale light filtered through the pines. Mara was already awake, gazing at the river. "They never leave completely," she said softly, "even in daylight. Even when you think you are safe, they wait. Patient, infinite, that is their nature." I understood. Survival was not about hiding or fleeing. It was about anchoring. Presence, out, resisting the pull of observation that sought to unravel me. The hollow was no longer just outside. It had begun to inhabit the space within my own mind. Each night's endurance left marks, subtle fractures, heightened awareness, and the constant sense that I was never fully alone. It observed the cracks Mara had warned me about, but it also noted every method I used to resist, learning, adapting. One night, the test escalated. The figure appeared earlier one day, moving with deliberate precision, its impossibly thin limbs bending in ways that made the shadows themselves twist. Its face reflected fragments of myself, Mara, even memories I did not consciously recognize. Elias, the name reverberated. I cataloged every detail, the ripples of the river, the unnatural bending of shadows, the subtle vibrations in the air. I recited intentions aloud, anchored myself to the notebook, to Mara, to reality itself. The figure raised an arm toward the river. Shapes in the water twisted violently, merging and vanishing. The tug at consciousness pressed harder, threatening to dissolve the boundaries of self. I forced awareness back into observation, into recording, into anchoring. Minutes stretched into eternity. The figure tilted its head, then withdrew. A faint hum lingered, vibrating through the floorboards. Trembling, I remained anchored. Mara exhaled softly. You endured. That is all that matters. You anchored. You observed. You resisted. I understood fully. Survival was not victory. It was endurance against a patient, infinite force that bent perception and exploited cracks. The rules, do not acknowledge, do not follow, do not look, anchor, declare intentions aloud, were not arbitrary. They were the only defense against total collapse. Sleep, when it came, was fragmented, impossible, full of rising shapes, pulsing doors, twisted reflections. The hollow's presence was patient, infinite, indifferent. At dawn, Mara whispered, "They never leave completely, even in daylight, even when you think you are safe. They wait, patient. Infinite, that is their nature." I understood. Survival was not about hiding, it was about presence, anchoring, resisting the pull of attention, and I knew with certainty the hollow was patient, the hollow was infinite, and I had only just begun to learn what it truly meant to endure. The night was impossibly still. Even the river seemed to hold its breath, reflecting the faint glow of the stars in distorted, almost alien patterns. I had grown accustomed to the tension, the constant vigilance, the need to anchor myself through observation and intention. And yet something in the air felt different tonight, heavier, as though the mountain itself were leaning closer to the outpost. Mara moved quietly, preparing our small defenses, the rules repeated in every gesture. Do not acknowledge, do not follow, do not look, anchor, declare intentions aloud. I sat on the floor, notebook open, hands trembling slightly as I repeated the mantra silently: observe, record, anchor. The words had become part of me, a lifeline against the infinite patience pressing from the darkness beyond. Hours passed, the silence stretching, taut and expectant, until a shift in the shadows at the edge of the clearing pulled my attention like gravity. The figure appeared. Taller than any man, impossibly thin, its limbs bending at angles no human body could sustain. Its face, blank and reflective, held fragments of memories I did not recognize, warped and twisted into an expression that was simultaneously familiar and alien. Elias. The elongated, warped call echoed through the air. My pulse surged, but I focused. Observation first, cataloging the impossible angles of its limbs, the distortions of shadows, the subtle undulations in the river's surface, repeating intentions aloud, anchoring. It moved closer, and I felt the tug at the edges of my mind grow stronger. The river behind it rippled unnaturally, reflecting shapes that were both me and not me. The forest around us seemed to bend toward its presence, shadows stretching unnaturally, twisting into forms that suggested consciousness, intelligence. The hollow was patient, yes, but tonight it had learned. Tonight it would probe deeper than before. I clutched the notebook, hands trembling, and recited my intentions aloud, louder this time, forcing every word through the fear. I am anchored, I observe, I record, I am present. The figure raised an impossibly long arm toward the river. Shapes rose from the water, reflections, echoes, fragments of past selves, all swirling, folding, merging into impossible geometries. My chest tightened, my mind threatened to fracture under the sheer weight of observation. Yet I forced myself to record, to catalog, to remain present, to resist. Mara's voice cut through the hum of tension, steady and unwavering. Anchor yourself. You have learned enough. Tonight, you face it fully. Do not falter. The figure's face shifted again, reflecting Mara, then me, then moments I could not name. The tug on my consciousness grew unbearable. It was no longer enough to anchor to words, to the notebook, to the room. I had to anchor to memory, to history, to the very essence of myself. I am Elias. I am here. I exist. The river roiled violently, the impossible reflections rising higher, threatening to collapse into me, into the room, into the forest itself. I repeated my intentions aloud, every word a tether against dissolution. I am anchored. I observe. I record. I am present. Time stretched, each second an eternity. The figure tilted its head, considering, testing, waiting. Then slowly it began to withdraw, shadows folding back into themselves, the impossible reflections sinking into the river. A faint hum lingered, vibrating through the floorboards, through my chest, but it had diminished. The pressure eased slightly, leaving me trembling, exhausted, but still present, still anchored. Mara exhaled softly, placing a steadying hand on my shoulder. "You endured," she whispered. "You faced it fully, and you remained anchored. That is all that matters." I nodded, understanding fully for the first time. Survival here was not about victory or defeating the hollow or even evading it. It was about endurance, about presence, about maintaining oneself in the face of an infinite patient force that bent perception and exploited every crack. The rules, their absurdity, their precision, were not arbitrary. They were shields, fragile but essential, against the unrelenting attention of something incomprehensible. Sleep came slowly, fragmented and uneasy, but for the first time in many nights it carried a small relief. Dreams still twisted and bent, but I felt a thread of control, a faint tether to my own mind, reinforced by the trials of the night. Shapes rose from the river, but I observed them as I would any natural phenomenon, cataloging and noting, anchoring myself firmly in presence. Dawn arrived pale, washing the forest in silver light. Mara was already awake, her gaze fixed on the river. "They never leave completely," she said softly. "Even in daylight, even when you think you are safe, they wait, patient, infinite. That is their nature." I nodded, understanding finally the full weight of her words. The hollow's patience was endless, its attention infinite, its presence unavoidable. And yet through endurance, through anchoring, through disciplined observation and adherence to the rules, I had carved out a small space of survival, a fragile refuge of self within the incomprehensible. The river flowed, normal yet subtly wrong. The forest moved, shadows lingered, the wind whispered, and I understood. I would continue to endure. I would remain present. I would anchor. The hollow was patient. The hollow was infinite. And I had learned at last what it truly meant to survive. I rose from the floor, hands still clutching my notebook, and looked at Mara. She nodded, almost imperceptibly, acknowledging both the trials we had endured and the ones that would surely come. Outside, the Appalachian mountains stretched into the horizon, vast and unyielding, beautiful and indifferent. The forest pulsed with hidden awareness, infinite and patient, and I felt the quiet, unshakable truth of my own place within it. We were small, fragile, impermanent. Yet in our vigilance, our adherence to rules, our conscious anchoring of self, we endured. And for now, that was enough. The hollow waited, as it always would. Patient, infinite, indifferent. And I, trembling, aware, alive, stood ready to face it again.